Hi everyone, and welcome to a webinar hosted by the Cloud Standards Customer Council, What's New in Cloud Foundry. Today we'll learn more about Cloud Foundry's roadmap for this year. This is Tracy Berardi. I'm Program Manager of the CSCC. Thanks so much for joining us today. I'm here virtually with Chip Childers. He's CTO of Cloud Foundry. So Cloud Foundry is an open source platform for deploying and managing cloud applications and is a project of the Linux Foundation. So Chip has joined us today to give an overview of the platform, its use cases, updates on core projects, and how you can get involved. And he'll also share some highlights from last week's Cloud Foundry Summit, which took place in Boston. So before turning the presentation over to Chip, I'd just like to point out in the Attachments tab, we've included a PDF download of the deck from today that you can go and take with you. There's also a link to the Cloud Foundry website. We should have some time for Q&A towards the end of the presentation. So please go ahead and enter your questions at any time, and we'll do our best to answer them. So without further ado, Chip, I'll open it up to you. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, and everybody, I appreciate you joining. What we're going to talk about today is really a bit of a roundup of the news and some of the information that was shared during last week's Cloud Foundry North America Summit that was held in Boston, Massachusetts. This is the first year that we've held the North American Summit not in Silicon Valley. One of our goals was to ensure that we could get closer to a lot of the end users. And so we moved it to the East Coast, and we may choose different locations for next year. That's still to be determined. But we had an amazing turnout of end users. I like to joke that it was a small intimate gathering of the Fortune 500 and Global 2000 trying to reinvent their business. So why don't we go ahead and get started. One of the first things that we're going to walk through really are what's kind of new in our community, what's new in our ecosystem. And for those of you that may not be familiar with Cloud Foundry, I'll explain that it's a collection of open source projects that also builds in a lot of open source code from a number of other communities that we consider to be part of our ecosystem. And it builds an application platform. We've recently expanded from just the traditional platform as a service experience to also including the container management level of abstraction using Kubernetes. So our first bit of member news was that SUSE has now launched their offering, which is called the SUSE Cloud Application Platform. It has become a certified distribution of Cloud Foundry, which means that the developer experience for the platform service is going to be the same experience you'd have with any of the other offerings. It's a fully open source software stack. It's actually one of two of the Cloud Foundry offerings that are certified that are actually software-based distributions. Many of the others are online services or managed on your behalf by the vendors. The next bit of news was that IBM also has expanded their Cloud Foundry offering portfolio. They have added a new offering. They're calling it experimental right now. That's called IBM Cloud Foundry Enterprise. And the idea here is that it's a way for someone to use IBM's cloud dashboard in order to request a isolated or standalone Cloud Foundry environment that's dedicated to you and to your organization. They do that actually by packaging up some of the Cloud Foundry application runtime components as Linux containers, and then deploying that onto their container management platform. So that's a really interesting new offering out in the community. Next, we were also very happy to talk about some of the efforts that have been happening in China around Cloud Foundry, and in particular, Alibaba, specifically the Alibaba Cloud, has both joined the foundation as a gold member. But what they've also done is they've added support for Ali Cloud to the BOSH, B-O-S-H, deployment tool. We have a capability called a cloud provider interface, and at this point now we have most of the major public cloud providers actively building and maintaining their own CPIs as part of the Foundation's effort. And for those that aren't actively building it themselves, we have other project participants that are supporting those activities. So we're really excited about Alibaba joining. We're also very excited about some of the possibilities for the Cloud Foundry distributions or use of the open source in some of the markets that Alibaba services that other cloud providers may not have as much footprint inside of. So with Alibaba joining, that has grown the Foundation membership, and the way to think about Foundation membership is that these are the organizations that pledge both financial as well as human support through their engineers, their product managers, their doc writers, to supporting the growth of the Cloud Foundry technology and helping build the shared ecosystem. The other thing we're very proud about is that, and you see it in a lot of these logos, over 40% of the organizations involved in the Foundation are actually end users. And in many cases, they're actually customers of some of the commercial distributions. This is pretty unique in the world of open source foundations, and we're very proud of it. Our user community is very active. They very much enjoy the opportunities to collaborate amongst each other, both within their industry as well as across different industries. There was also a ton of other member news, various organizations from systems integrators like Altoros or ISVs like TIBCO, Dynatrace, some of our training partners like ResilientScale. If you go to cloudfoundry.org, which is a link in the attachments to the webinar, you can find the press releases from the summit. Lots of amazing activity happening in the ecosystem, all kinds of new ways to integrate with the Cloud Foundry platform, and new services and capabilities that companies are launching. The other thing that we're very proud of is that we run that certification program, the platform certification program, and we do that each year. We have a new version of that program. And vendors that used to be part of the program are effectively committing that they're using the part of Cloud Foundry that represents the heart of it. They're using it in unmodified form from what the upstream project is releasing. And then they're differentiating through all the different various capabilities and services that they add on, the markets that they work within, the industries that they have special capabilities to support. And this year, in the 2018 wave, we have 8 certified distributions. I mentioned SUSE earlier, but you'll notice the upper left there is cloud.gov. Cloud.gov is a U.S. federal government-run platform as a service environment that was created to help agencies more effectively build applications. So if you think about enterprise or commercial organization, they're going through a digital transformation to ensure that they are effectively servicing the needs of their customers, their partners, and their supply chain. The same thing is actually happening in governments throughout the world, and Cloud.gov is the first government-run version of Cloud Foundry that meets the same certification criteria that all of the other commercial offerings do. We think that's really wonderful. The other thing we did was talk a bit about a user survey. This is the second wave of a user survey that we ran in order to get a handle on those that opt in to answer questions. What's going on in the Cloud Foundry user base in a more statistical way? And since this is our second wave, we do see some things that are consistent and other things that are actually changing since the last wave back in 2017. What we see that's consistent is that we're definitely large enterprise or large organizations are one of the predominant adopters of the Cloud Foundry platform. But that's not to diminish the use of Cloud Foundry by small enterprises and the SMB segment of of the user base. Oftentimes, the smaller organizations will make use of the online managed offerings purely because the wonderful thing about Cloud Foundry is that it can get out of the way. It helps free developers to be more productive, and for a lot of the smaller organizations, they don't want to worry about operating the system or where it's run, and so they choose to buy, a managed service. But also these large enterprises, they are the ones that we tend to talk the most about. They also have some of the largest scale and some of the most interesting transformational journeys that they're going on. The other thing that we've seen is that there's a significant growth in usage there's a few ways that we measure this, and there's some highlights here, but then we'll also switch to a graph in a moment. A couple points. So the first is that 61% of the users are generating, are these large enterprise organizations, as I mentioned, but 53% of them have only been using the platform for less than 2 years. And that's a way that we know that it's continuing to be adopted by more and more organizations. The next thing I'd actually point to, though, is that within the organizations that are responding to the survey, we've seen some pretty dramatic shifts in the volume of use inside the organization. And so we ask this really 2 different ways. One is how many developers are building apps and deploying the CF, and also how many applications are being operated within a Cloud Foundry environment. And what we found going from the 2017 to the 2018 survey results was, in particular, I'll point at the 50-plus developers shift from 28% to 49% of organizations with over 50 developers. Some of them, and I'll point out T-Mobile as an example, or Comcast as another example, have thousands of developers that are writing apps and using Cloud Foundry as the deployment platform for them. And we've also seen kind of a similar shift, although the numbers are slightly lower, with the 500-plus apps going from 8% to 14% of respondents. So there's certainly a lot of organizations that have a few number of developers, a few number of applications, but the growth that we're seeing in kind of the higher-end use is fairly dramatic, given that I believe it was about 6 months between user surveys. We also asked the users to tell us a bit about what matters to them. 92% cite cross-platform flexibility as being super important. 48% are actually using multiple infrastructure providers underneath their Cloud Foundry environment. So you think about this as the term multi-cloud, or even going back to hybrid cloud. Do you use off-prem and on-prem infrastructure options? Within the Cloud Foundry user base, we're seeing a breadth of infrastructure choice, and that's one of the things that the CF platform is very well suited for. It's able to deploy and manage itself into these different infrastructure platforms. And there's some interesting splits between, they're using 62% definitely have an on-prem private cloud, some are doing off-prem public clouds, shared environments, some are doing kind of a spin on private cloud, which would be dedicated but off-prem and kind of managed on their behalf. And, we asked, do they like it? So if you're interested in, if you're considering how your developers could take advantage of CF, 82% give it a very favorable rating and would recommend it to, to other folks. We consider that to be a pretty decent response rate, especially for, some open source software that that is evolving quite rapidly. Very, very favorable users. They enjoy the experience. They find it very productive, and perhaps even more importantly, they are saving dramatic. Looks like we're getting some errors there, Tracy. 404, no video or audio.
Oh, actually, I can advance. I still see the...
Okay. Well, I'm seeing questions from the audience having some problems. So I'm going to back it up and keep going, because I think if you're able to see it, we're okay. All right,
yes,
so Cloud Foundry...
Thank you.
So
Sorry
Cloud
about
Foundry...
that.
Yeah, no problem. Cloud Foundry is saving you up to 10 weeks and $100,000 average per application development cycle. There's one use case that we were proud to highlight, which was the U.S. Air Force. And by using Cloud Foundry as well as changing the way that they develop software to be much more agile, they were able to achieve hundreds of millions of dollars in savings annually, switching their methodology, but also changing the platform that they deploy their applications on. So there's some really amazing savings out there, not to mention all of the value of the new apps that are being built. So a few use cases. We have Volkswagen as a great example. Volkswagen is, as we all know, a car company, but it's actually made up of a number of different brands. They have all kinds of different needs. But what's really fundamental about the automotive industry right now is that it's shifting to being a very, a very different industry than it was in the past. The car has become a new platform for connectivity. Not only is the car allowing you to get from point A to point B, but oftentimes in that while you're driving, your experience is being fundamentally changed, whether that's integrated GPS or a number of different smart car capabilities. You need robust software in a central data center or back off on the internet that's able to interact with this new connected platform. Volkswagen had no in-house development capability when they started this journey. And in less than 2 years, they ramped up to 150 developers. They're developing across all 12 of the brands they own, from Porsche to Lamborghini to the core Volkswagen brand. And they're also using multiple infrastructure providers. So it's a really amazing transformation from not having software development capability to having it. I mentioned the U.S. Air Force as well, so we'll just go ahead and highlight this one. So I already mentioned that they saved $600 million. This really was astounding. It was a particular type of application within the Air Force portfolio of applications they were focused on, very logistics-centric. How do they manage refueling of jets throughout the world? And they were woefully behind in being automated with this. There was a huge whiteboard. It didn't work very effectively. And so a team was able to use iteration, use rapid development techniques, use the Cloud Foundry software, and they ended up saving the U.S. government $600 million, which is definitely non-trivial. We also have the Home Depot. So retail is very fascinating. In the retail space, we think about a brick and mortar store, and sure enough, here's an example of a store that literally sells bricks and mortar. But they're facing competition. They're facing competition from Amazon, who also sells hammers. And so the Home Depots had to really focus on how can they also build this software capability? How can they reinvent their infrastructure? They came into Cloud Foundry. They also started building the in-house capabilities. They've had some training programs where they've found store associates that were interested in being developers and kind of brought them into the organization. And so they've gotten up to over 2,500 developers using Cloud Foundry in less than 2 years. There's over 3,000 applications in prod, and they've decreased the deployment from 6 weeks to 15 minutes, right? Their average app deployment cycle was 6 weeks from idea, getting all the way through the pipeline. Now they're literally making a change, and it's getting out to production for you as a consumer to use in less than 15 minutes. So really amazing stories. We know that Cloud Foundry's got lots of other use cases that are showing similar results. Again, these are large organizations with really interesting challenges that they're facing. So let's spend a minute and talk about the foundation itself. It's a good way to get a feel for some of the activities that we're focused on, not just at the foundation staff level, but the community around us. And there's really 3 focus areas for the next 12 months. So the first one is continuing to focus on velocity. How can the Cloud Foundry platform evolve to ensure that the valuable development velocity that orgs are aiming for is achieved. Next is we also need to continue to focus the innovation in the broader cloud-native ecosystem. This includes, pulling in other projects. This includes hackathons within our own community. It includes iterating as we recommend that organizations that use CF do. And last, interoperability. And this is both interoperability and integration into your existing environments, but it also includes interoperability with other open source efforts, other platforms that might provide complementary experiences to the core Cloud Foundry experience. So our priorities are really to continue to strengthen the ecosystem, which you'll see in a bit is growing quite nicely, and that's so that the end users involved have a rich set of options for anything they want to do around CF. But we're also cultivating the community, and in particular, we're focused on continuing to build on our success in North America and Europe, but also look to Asia. And as the companies in China begin their digital transformation journey, they're going to do it very, very quickly. And we think the Cloud Foundry ecosystem has a lot to offer them. One of the things that every open source project needs to do is kind of show off the, I call them vanity statistics, but really if you think about this at a very high level, the Cloud Foundry projects are one of the largest open source efforts on the planet today, one of the highest velocity projects on the planet today. We release at minimum of twice a month. That's a lot of code spanning 40 project teams, over 500 Git repositories. All of this is brought together, and we're continuing to increase the pace of change of the software as we get more details from the end users about what they're looking for. In June of last year, we launched a series of training and professional certification products. We were really happy to see that we've had over 15,000 developers get trained, get certified, enroll in the various offerings that are part of this. If you want to learn more about any of these, you can go to cloudfoundry.org/training. Great material in there, and a lot of really good authorized training partners. I mentioned ecosystem earlier. In Basel of last year, which was our European summit near the end of the year, we launched a part of the Cloud Foundry site that was called the Foundry. Think of it as a gateway to finding and discovering different technical integrations from ISVs, different systems integrators, different training partners, infrastructure options that all tie into or support the Cloud Foundry technology stack. Since then, we started at about 700. We've grown this now to over 4,900. There are several thousand more that have yet to be classified and brought into that part of the site. We really recommend you take a look if you're an existing CF user to find out new ideas for integrations or new professional services offerings that could help support you. But if you haven't used Cloud Foundry before, it's also a really good way to get a feel for what support would be available to you. And so you could see by the end user stories that I've been telling, the number of large enterprises, we're really proud of the fact that over half of the Fortune 500 are using Cloud Foundry to shape the future of their companies, right, to go through that digital transformation process. To give you a feel for across industries, and I'm not going to spend a lot of time on these, but there are amazing use cases coming out of the consumer or retail-focused space. We're seeing use cases, of course, all over the technology spectrum, different organizations using Cloud Foundry to either enhance their own ability to deliver software or help support their customers and partners. Financial services and the consulting industry also tend to be very early on in adoption, and that's of any technology that's potentially very valuable to them. That's no different for Cloud Foundry. There were some of our earliest adopting organizations. They're using it in a very high scale, and they're using it to help them, especially these large organizations. They're using it to help them ensure that they have a they're able to maintain velocity and agility for their application portfolio, largely because there are thousands of financial services startups that would love to eat away at what they do in the market. Transportation and logistics is another area. We talked about Volkswagen, but there's other examples where we have American Airlines is a great story. They're actually using Cloud Foundry from 2 different commercial distributions. They find it equally valuable. They use it for many different things to try to ensure that customer experience works really well for you as a flyer. Media, telecom, healthcare, pharma. The list just goes on and on. It's an amazing set of experiences. You'll see, heavy industry and manufacturing. Also similar to the automotive side, there's a very interesting dynamic between edge computing or IoT devices and how the architecture of an IoT platform needs a strong central application framework to support it. I did mention government earlier with cloud.gov, but you can see there's quite a few government and education and nonprofit orgs that are using Cloud Foundry to change citizen and citizen engagement. So our ecosystem here, we have, again, 4,900 services. We're spending a lot of effort as a community, including all the distribution, supporting the growth of these services. And that included a ISV day that we did at this Boston event, where we both presented the wealth of opportunities for ISVs to tie into this big market, as well as hands-on support for companies that wanted to work through maybe the details of an integration. And we're seeing that expansion happen, for the CPIs, for the infrastructure, again, those service brokers, but also the systems integrators themselves. There's a lot of systems integrator activity happening because a lot of companies want to rework existing applications to make them more cloud native, to make them fit into the same model that the new software that they're developing fits into. So tons of opportunity there for the systems integrator market. And then we have interoperability. I've mentioned this a couple times, but I'll just kind of hopefully land this point. Cloud Foundry is absolutely very focused on making sense of the large amount of innovation that's occurring in different parts of the open source world. What our community really believes is its strength is focusing on the developer experience, focusing on the operator experience. And we're very happy when we don't have to write our own software. What we like to do is actually work with adjacent communities to ensure that the needs of the users are being well understood. And we pull that software in gradually or, when appropriate, quickly to the broader CF platform. That includes the Istio Service Mesh project, Envoy, which is a low-level proxy that's being used at the container level. Kubernetes, I talked about with the launch of the Cloud Foundry Container Runtime. We were one of the earliest adopters of the container networking interface, as well as the work of the Open Container Initiative. So with that, it looks like I spent about 30 minutes going through the slides, and I believe we're at the point now where we can open it up to questions. So, Tracy?
Yes, thank you, Chip. Great presentation, and plenty of time for questions. We do have a couple that have come in, but now is a good time if you have anything burning. First question, there seems to be a lot of information about Cloud Foundry and Kubernetes. Can you tell us a bit more about what projects are happening around this integration?
Sure. So the first one that I mentioned was the Cloud Foundry Container Runtime, which is packaging Kubernetes and using the BOSH tooling. That was a project that was created by Google, Pivotal Software, and VMware and Swisscom, a telecommunications company in Switzerland. They're all working on that. The idea there is that something needs to deploy Kubernetes, and BOSH is amazing at that. So they're focused on deployment and caring for the kube cluster itself. The second set of projects are various ways that the Kubernetes orchestration layer, or container platform, may be at a point where, in some environments, it can replace a chunk of the Cloud Foundry application runtime architecture, where we have a kind of a bespoke container orchestration tool called Diego. We as a community built that Diego platform in order to serve all of those user stories, and I referred to our focus on the user stories, starting at a time before Kubernetes was ready. But it's starting to reach the point where, in some environments, using Kubernetes could represent a deduplication of components, could help compress the operational considerations that companies have. So there's different ways that these technologies can be stacked, and there's a lot of exploration happening there. But the third, and perhaps the most important to me, is finding a way to unify or make consistent the experience between the platform as a service level of abstraction, right? Just hand the platform code, let it deal with containers for you, and the container level of abstraction, where you say, hey, I got this container image from an ISV. They say I should just run it in Kubernetes, right? So we need things like shared authentication, shared logging, shared networking. So there's a lot of activity happening. If you're involved in open source, or you want to get involved in open source, lots of these projects have been spun up. Some of them are in their early stages. Feel free to join the community. If you take a look at the primary development mailing list, which is the CF-dev mailing list, you can find a lot of these proposals out there. The teams are open for comment and really looking to continue the conversation about how these integrations should work. We do hear a lot from the end users that we know, that we communicate with, that they want these two experiences to work really well together.
Thanks, Chip. Next question. So Cloud Foundry has historically been a larger platform. Are there any options for smaller installations?
Yeah, so that is a very good question. So the CF application runtime is absolutely kind of by default packaged for high availability and a decent amount of scale, because as you can see, a large part of our end user population, the customers and the vendors, are big companies, or a large part of our commercial distribution side of the market, these are service providers, right? So they need scale, they need high availability, they need all of the components to be redundant. And so by default, that's how Cloud Foundry ships. But there's been a lot of work. There's a few things, actually. So there's two projects in particular I will highlight, and then the third I'll point to as a future direction. So the first project is a thing called CF Local. And what CF Local does is it allows a developer's local workstation experience to mimic the larger cloud platform environment, Cloud Foundry platform environment, and actually allow a developer to interact with services and push and pull applications that have been pre-staged in a CF cluster in some really interesting ways. So it kind of bridges the local experience into the large cluster. The second is, not to be confused with the name of the mailing list, is a project called CF-dev. And that is a top-to-bottom Cloud Foundry experience that runs entirely local, that includes the BOSH deployment layer. And it uses, right now it's early stages of the project, and right now Mac OS is the only operating system being supported, but Linux is coming quickly, Windows will come quickly after that. The idea is to use the native hypervisor, which many of you might not even realize that OS X has a hypervisor built into it, in order to bootstrap the full CF stack as minimal as possible, but to give you the full experience, both the operator and the developer experience. So those are really cool. The last thing I'll point to is some talk about, I would say, minimal public cloud deployment patterns. What would the manifest look like for a minimal public cloud deployment as opposed to a full, highly available deployment? That work's starting, but again, if you get involved in the community, you can see that conversation occurring. We'd love your feedback on it.
Thanks, Chip, for all done with questions, but I do have a final personal one, if you have a second, about the summit last week. Did you learn anything interesting? Did anything surprise you? And then when is the next big Cloud Foundry event? We can help share it across our membership as well, of course.
Yeah, absolutely. So the thing that I learned up in Boston that was particularly interesting to me was actually, it had to do with T-Mobile. So one of the typical approaches that organizations take is that they will start with a set of projects that are greenfield, or new systems of engagement is another way to describe it, web apps, or mobile application backends, and that's kind of how they start to modernize their development process. T-Mobile took a very different approach. They went for the heart of their company, their core processing systems, and that's what they adopted CF for first. So that was a pattern that I was very surprised to hear about, but it's been massively successful for them, and they're just one of many companies, regardless of the path they took to get there, where truly the entire company relies on the Cloud Foundry platform to run their core business applications, as well as all of the great websites or microsites or various other services that might be around the edge. So that was fascinating. That was an interesting, I would almost say anti-pattern, but it worked so successfully. It was just a counterintuitive adoption pattern.
Interesting.
Yeah. So the next thing or the next question you asked was what's the next event? Well, the next event is the Cloud Foundry Summit in Basel, Switzerland. This is going to be our European event, and that's going to be coming up in the fall. Of course, Tracy, you asked me the question, and off the top of my head, I forget what it is exactly. But you can easily find it if you go to so if you go to cloudfoundry.org, you can click on the events tab, and you'll see the European Summit there. The other option is you can just go to cfsummit.com. That's one word, cfsummit.com. That'll redirect you straight to the events page. All of our events are there. There's also a number of what we call Cloud Foundry days. These are single-day events, smaller, more regional, but also great opportunities for learning about Cloud Foundry. They happen around the world. There's one happening one happened actually in New York right before the Boston Summit. I believe there's one coming up actually in Copenhagen, tied to the Cloud Native Con and KubeCon event. So that'll be coming up next week. And then even later in the year, we're going to be having one in Bangalore in India. That should be a lot of fun. I'm looking forward to that trip. So there's tons of ways you can get to an event. If you can't make it to one of our larger summits, take a look for a CF day. If you can't make it to a CF day, there are over 200 different meetup groups that talk about Cloud Foundry around the globe.
Super. And to help you out there, I just pulled up the site as well. The October dates are October 10th, or the Europe dates, sorry, are October 10th to 11th.
Awesome. Thank you. So there you go. 10th to the 11th, Basel, Switzerland. It is an amazing city. If you haven't been there, I really recommend you come.
And I'm excited because next month, towards the end of May, we're having your colleague Dan Cohn, Executive Director of the Cloud Native Computing Foundation, in for a webinar just like this. So we're looking forward to that as well. And thank you so much, Chip, for joining us again this year following the summit. I hope to hear from you again soon. And thanks for everyone for tuning in today. We're gonna end now, and the recording will be captured. You can grab a copy of the presentation from the attachments tab if you'd like. So everyone have a great rest of the day, and thank you again. Bye now.